everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, Solidarity Fridays. Joe and Kyle here. How you doing today, Kyle?
Good, Joe. How are you doing today?
Great. Love that map in your background.
Thank you.
Like either India or Africa, I can't tell. But anyway, here we are. Beautiful to be wrapping up 2020, doing a podcast. What better thing is there?
Come on, 2021, be better.
So, yeah, before we dig in, just a reminder that we've probably got a few spaces left. We're getting really close to selling out our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists 8-week program. I think we have a couple spots left in both the Group 1 and Group 2 time slots. What is that? 2 and 7 p.m. Eastern?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So, times that work for folks in the UK and also folks in Australia. It's just fascinating to get so many people from all over the world. I think we even had some Russians recently, so don't even know what their time zone looks like, but it's probably difficult. Yeah, an amazing course. You've heard about it here plenty, folks, but if you want to learn more, go to psychedelic-education-center.com to dig into some details, some testimonials, some course outline stuff. What's our CE status, Kyle? We offer CEs in the state of California for nurses, therapists, and psychologists.
Correct. Yep. Co-sponsored by the Spiritual Competency Resource Center, organization by Dr. David Lukoff. And yeah, we're all set with that. But, if you're seeking CE credits for your state, just make sure that works for you. Maybe reach out to your board and see if you can get approval. But yeah, it's approved by the APA, so it should be okay on your end. But double check.
It's highly transferable. Put it that way. And yeah, people from all over. I think some folks even internationally can accept it with their licensing boards. So yeah, just check in and see what you can do. We'd love to have you. Yeah, 8 weeks of live support, and it's one of my favorite things that we do here. Yeah, excited that we start up soon.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't know if I mentioned this on the show yet, but I was listening to a friend of mine who recorded an interview with a published Qabalist who's been like doing Kabbalah work for a long time and really dedicated to that path. Used to be quite the psychedelic person. Smoked plenty of DMT, ingested plenty of acid. And he had some comments about how the psychedelic world psychedelics aren't really a thing that can help with spiritual growth. And then Roland Griffiths kind of like paired that with some sort of, for me at least, Roland Griffiths had some sort of quote like meditation is the true path and psychedelics are the crash course. And it's just really perplexed. I'm like, that's a really specific statement. And I don't really know what that even means. And I'm just uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, I guess the way that I hear that is thinking about like in the beginning of DMT, the Spirit Molecule by Dr. Rick Strassman. He talked about going around to some of the Buddhist temples and I guess interviewing some of those folks that kind of converted to meditation and Buddhism, and people had this experience with psychedelics in the 60s and then really kind of finding their path with meditation. So I guess the way that I hear that is like psychedelic substances can really kind of give us an insight, a glimpse into what's possible, but maybe the path really is within that integration, meditation, and just kind of being in the moment. I don't know, that's the way I kind of hear it.
So to bring Strassman back, I remember reading Strassman's DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, where he was kind of critiquing a lot of the Hopkins work and attitudes at Hopkins by being a little too like Buddhist Hindu centric. And at times their language can be offensive to Jewish folks who like prophecy was the way that they got a lot of their wisdom and wisdom traditions in the Hebrew faith. And yeah, like what does it mean that we're using Eastern language and kind of making it central to how we think things are superior to one another? Like, yeah, mindfulness is great. Meditation's pretty cool too. There's got to be meditation systems out there that are total bullshit, and there's got to be meditation systems out there that are super helpful.
Right.
But it's like, what are we helping? Like, why are we doing it just to be better adjusted to Western culture? Are we doing it to treat our symptoms? Do we just want a clearer mind? Do we want enlightenment? Like, what is enlightenment? Like, what are we doing here? And like, does shamanism have this concept? Like, in your experience with the Abenaki folks, like, was there kind of this religious hierarchy of states or stages of development?
Studying with my teacher Michael and that other Abenaki elder D, it didn't really seem that way. It seemed more about the relationship that you have with the world and the universe and like the spirits. And, is it about attaining a certain thing? I don't necessarily think that is true, but maybe I'm wrong. I remember talking to my teacher Michael about this and kind of using that metaphor of like, plants and trees growing towards the light and that enlightenment thing. And it seems like that's what we're trying to do, is grow so tall that we fall over, because we don't really grow a deep root system and maybe have that bidirectional growth versus.
It's kind of almost okay to fall over and get decomposed and get consumed by future generations, right? It's like almost a, natural. But I like this idea of like deep roots so you can stay longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, is it just about deepening our relationship with community, self, and, the whole ecosystem you're involved in? Is it, like, I don't really care about culture. I'm going to care about my religious path more so than culture. That's, hermits have been doing that for a long time. Monks and hermits love that stuff. So like, what, your point, like with psychedelics, do we really know what we're doing yet? Like, I think the answer is still no. I kind of agree with you. We kind of know what we're doing, but we're going to have like a really weird psychedelic landscape in 10 years. Really weird. A lot of spiritual emergency we're not ready for. Yeah, probably a lot more that we don't even know to ask yet.
Right, yeah.
And, we've all got our work cut out for us because this thing isn't looking like it's going to stop anytime soon.
The train has left the station and it is going.
Yeah, it's full speed ahead for a lot of folks. And so like back to this idea of spiritual development, like what I think this Qabalist I was mentioning was getting at was just the people who are, with minimal intention or education, smoking DMT in a basement or, eating acid in a basement and just not doing much with it, just hanging out for entertainment purposes. And, I get that. Like, sure, you can learn some things. Absolutely. I don't know how much of a transformation you're going to have doing that, if that's what you're looking for. That's one of the problems here, Kyle, is like, what are we looking for when we're doing this stuff? Do we just want to like, what are the different aspects of mind I can get through this? Or I want a little bit of relief from my day-to-day bullshit. I just spent all day doing this job I don't like, and I want to do this thing now because I like it.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
have you really approached it ever from like a spiritual development lens?
I'm being very honest, and I'll be honest here. That ayahuasca session I had was one of the very few experiences I took drugs very intentionally. If we want to call ayahuasca a drug, plant medicine, whatever. Yeah. But when I had, I totally forget her name, this woman on the show not that long ago, talking about like just adding in a little bit of intentionality kind of changes the thing. Like, I'm doing this so I can have a really great time with my friends, blow off some stress from work, have deeper bonding with my group of friends, stuff like that. Like that to me seems to have served me quite well. Like, certainly I was a little too amplified 12 months ago. I'm happy I'm a little more sober now than I was then. But, like I think that served me really well. Like, I've, certainly had accidents that turned into really interesting scenarios, learning situations, but, it's really different. So, my holy grail is still breath work, in the Graf tradition, dream shadow stuff. Like, that's really where I feel most comfortable doing my self-exploration and spiritual development, whatever that even means.
Why is that different to you then, I guess?
Because there's the community there, and that's the intention of that community. And I'm not going to try to force that on my friends that I go see shows with.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to try to make them, let's do this with intention and have a ritual before. I'm not going to push that on anybody, because that's, a little cartoonish to do that and go get all debauched out,
I mean, and I think that's a really important like question to explore there, just topic to explore. And I'm just even thinking like, not psychedelic related, but I remember I had a friend that was, we were camping and it was like a full moon, and I brought some tobacco with me just to kind of leave as an offering. And I asked him if he wanted to kind of just, say a prayer or leave something. He's like, that's not really my thing, man. He's like, if you want to do that, that's cool. And it got me thinking like, oh yeah, like this is my practice. Why does it need to be his practice?
If I was super high and you said that, I'd be like, okay, like give me a moment to regroup. And like,
what are
I
you
could
doing?
probably do that. But yeah, like if you said it to somebody who's super secular, an executive at a big bank or like a tech company, they're just like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know what to do with that. Like if they were sober and that was like said ahead of time and agreed to ahead of time, kind of like informed consent, like that's a very different animal. So I guess let's back to this like development thing. Like, what is spiritual development? I think it's different depending on the lens. I'm not going to say one's superior to the other, but I have a suspicion some are superior than others. But it's like, what are we going for? Do we want, to remove the fear of death? Do we want to remove the fear, like existential anxiety from day to day, or do we want to just simply not have PTSD anymore?
Right.
Or to feel good all the time, a la like, I don't know if that's fair, but something more like, a Tai Chi, acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine approach where we're kind of like really balanced.
Right.
For the majority, like as much as we can be for the course of our life. Or like, what is enlightenment? Is it simply that someone can point a gun in your face and you don't flinch? Or is it like, I don't know, do you just have special powers, like what they kind of advise you from steering away from in the Yoga Sutras? Like I have a little bit of a hard time with that, people using that term. I remember Daniel Gregg on our show a while back said something along the lines of, it's just like, how easy is your life? Like how much do you beat yourself up on your day to day? Like maybe you're still a bad parent, but you don't beat yourself up about it. You tried your best, and you're on to the next thing. Is it like less attachment than normal?
Right. I don't know. I guess the question comes up for me is like, how are we defining spiritual? And I think that might be different from person to person. And when I hear that term like spiritual development, I just think of something that I heard, I think Lenny talk about in a breathwork training one time. And he said, we're not doing therapy here. We're doing personal and spiritual development. And it was like the first time I heard him use the word spiritual development, but it got me thinking like, what does that mean? Right? Like, what is spiritual development? And maybe it's different for each person, right? Mm-hmm. I think maybe the way we all approach spirituality is different. So I guess it kind of comes down to trying to define what is spiritual or what is spirituality to you. And then how do some of these practices maybe help to deepen your relationship with whatever that thing that you're defining as spirituality is.
Right. If we want to look like, so take Roman Catholic Church as an example. That's the one I'm kind of most familiar with. Like you're going in there, you're consuming what you should literally believe is the body and blood of Christ, the bread and the wine that was transfigured by the priest. And you're consuming that, and you're having the Holy Spirit enter you, like you're having some sort of communion with the Holy Spirit. And, by maintaining a certain lifestyle and certain rituals, you will go to heaven. So it's kind of like a 1 and 0. Like you're going to hell forever, you're going to heaven forever. And that's kind of like the, did you make it or not? Right. And realistically, if you confess and have a communion right before you die, like you're in great shape and you go right to heaven. So there's some religions that don't really have this afterlife concept. Like in ancient Greece, it was kind of just like, a shady nether region that not much activity is happening in. You're still there, but there's not much going on. That's kind of how I interpret it. I don't really know if there's much of a idea of the afterlife in Hebrew faith. Like certainly God pervades all there and like stewards that community, not like group of people. But that's, that's a little interesting. It's very different from like, Catholicism or like the more Hindu kind of like levels of spiritual development, or like Buddhist levels of development, like till you hit Lama or like awakened Buddha, you can hit these like targets that they set out for you,
right,
through certain like series of rituals. And, in that way it's kind of like a 0 and 1 as well, but it's kind of like You can kind of grade the path, like, okay, did you make it 70% of the way to your 1 and 0 switch?
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to like have people think I'm being dismissive because I love this religious literature. Like even early American Christian thought was just fascinating to me, how it like splintered and was diversified. I loved medieval Christian philosophy. I loved Arabic philosophy, like kind of even pre-Islam was just like one of my favorite things ever. In my undergrad, I was like, oh, fuck yeah, this is so cool. Because it's like just a development on the Greek by like a couple hundred years, 600 years or something. Anyway, so like, I'm not trying to be dismissive. And, so here's one in like Western esotericism. This is a really interesting, like kind of split in like kind of Christian Western esoteric thinking or post-Christian esoteric thinking. Like a lot of the alchemical tradition, Kabbalistic tradition, Western mystery traditions, like you were trying to get to the point where you could sit at the feet of God and kind of understand it as much as a human could. And on the other hand, you were trying to become so powerful and all-knowing that you essentially kind of merged with God. I think I've said that on the show a few times. So how certain people approach different drugs in a spiritual capacity could be seen to be like one or the other or different, or I just want to commune with this forest and be here with these kind of quote unquote lower spirits, which, hierarchy in spiritual things is so complicated. Like if we want to, be somewhat pantheist, like trees have spirits, like metal has spirits. And like you can certainly commune with those things, and that could be a really spiritually important experience for you. But like how does that relate to growth? Are we just trying to rack up experiences?
Spiritual materialism, that's definitely a thing.
Right. So like the dream shadow thing where we get together all the time and have our, breath work sessions, and we have our kind of like dinners and hangouts, like where we can just kind of like explore these things. Like, is a really important passage to me from like some Hindu book, or not Hindu, sorry, some Jewish passage around like where I forget, but something along the lines of when two people come together and read the Torah together and study it together, that's where God is. And so that kind of thing really works for me in the dream shadow context. It's like when we get together and do this kind of like spiritual philosophy together, like that to me is like super important, super valuable and helpful for me as an individual. And, I think like I never went to Solterra, but like when you were there, that was probably somewhat of the feel you got outside of session when you were having like meaningful conversations with people, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely felt like that. And I mean, just the aspect of being in Maloka and, having the shamans there. I mean, I felt like I was in a spiritual hospital. Like things were just happening and kind of like working with like, the sickness in my body and having these healers come over. Like it definitely felt like I was in some sort of spiritual hospital. And the community aspect, just sitting around like and having lunches and dinners and breakfast together and having so much downtime to just like be with one another, to share our experiences. And, I think that's what really kind of draws us to some of this work at times. Like if we've been in it for a while, it's like, I don't know, that's what really the thing that had me keep coming back to breath work is like that sense of community. And I think a lot of people start to find their community in these medicine spaces and, ayahuasca circles and whatnot, because, you're having an experience together and being able to explore and share that. And sometimes these are so vulnerable and so deep experiences that's like, you're together with a bunch of strangers and you feel like you've just like shared things or experienced things that you've never really experienced with, the closest people in your life. And, somehow that creates a sense of maybe meaning or connection that just is hard to maybe find elsewhere. So it's interesting to really kind of view the community or community aspect as part of like spirituality in a sense. And, I don't know, it's really interesting. I was actually just talking to a friend about this, but when I was in grad school I was in my social justice class, and I had to volunteer somewhere, and I ended up volunteering at the church in my town. I'm not, a very religious person, so it was kind of like a interesting thing to do. But I remember I wrote this whole paper. Like I was working in this warehouse. It was for like the thrift store, and I just kept watching like how like they would do all this volunteer work, and it was really like this place for people to come together of like all diverse backgrounds for some common, goal, whether that's to help people or to come and pray. And just thinking about like, how we're kind of moving away from religion, and a lot of people identify maybe as spiritual, and maybe people have issues with, these mainstream religious organizations because of, all the stuff that's been unfolding for forever, and, maybe a little distrust here and there. But like, I really, the paper really focused on, I think these establishments were crucial for community. And for community development. It was a place to like really come together and do good, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have that sense of community when you need, a sense of hope and inspiration. And like what happens when, we start to move away from that because there's like maybe some distrust, and like, what are we then creating? Is there another like focal point in the community where people are coming together to maybe, feel that, to be able to grieve, to find hope, to pray, to volunteer and help out, other communities that might be less fortunate. And so it was really interesting to kind of think about, because like I said, I think like the last time I went to church was like when I was a kid. I've been here and there for like weddings or, going with a friend, but I never really went. And so for me, it feels like an alien thing. And it was just really interesting to kind of re-explore that and, kind of take a different approach to it and be like, wow, like this is actually like a really important possible establishment for community. And what happens when we start to move away from that? Where are we finding it? I think maybe that's why we're starting to find it in like yoga or psychedelic spaces and this and that. People are finding these other places to gather and to, find hope, pray, develop spiritual practices, etc.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. Like, what other containers are there to do charity? Like, there's certainly secular ones, but there's so many more smaller, religious ones.
Yeah.
And, like, it's kind of a nice thing to do charity together with your community.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, after that experience, it definitely made me kind of want to find like a church or something to be part of, even though I don't really connect with that. I feel like I have this more shamanic spiritual orientation at times, but like, still you look at some of the rituals, it's all semi-similar. You're developing a relationship with God, the universe, creator, the earth, however you really want to define that. And yeah.
So like that guy that made the comic book, the ayahuasca comic book, Moeller, Moler, he wrote this book, Shamanic Kabbalah. And I thought that was an interesting thing that he pieced together. It's like, how do you do shamanism, but pair it with some sort of more structured program that's like Kabbalah? And I think I haven't had the chance to really dig into it yet, but I appreciate his approach. He's really sharing his personal journey. He's not saying this is necessarily for everybody. It's like, well, if you want something that's a little more structured, that ties in a different wisdom tradition, like maybe use that, like it's hard for me to say like Kabbalah and like feel like people are going to understand what I'm saying on the show. Cause there's that Kabbalah cult in LA or whatever that a lot of Hollywood folks are in. So it's like it's not really that. Kind of is, but kind of isn't. Like there's a lot of stuff there. I think the Kabbalah traditions are discussed in some transpersonal psych textbooks. I know Stan's given it some lip service here and there, but it's, it's just a structured path that has been used for a long time, possibly as old as Egypt, but who knows? And yeah, a lot of traditions have used it. There's even like a Christian version now, like probably a number of Christian versions. So yeah, I'm sure there's a gazillion versions of it, but it's, there's a whole lot of things in there that can help you make sense of your development, like where is like, is there a physicality? Like, is there like a location to spirit? Like, is it just all pervasive? Like, do the higher, quote unquote, higher things come through different energy channels? Like,
Right.
how do the planets relate to this thing? How does the sun relate to this thing? Yeah. So there's so much there. It's to me just wildly complicated. I'm certainly not a lama or an adept or anything like that. So it's hard for me to really speak with too much authority, but I want to at least throw out questions so people aren't just saying, "Oh, cool. Like this guy's a shaman. He's got a nice ponytail and he wears white clothes all the time. Like, cool, he's my man." Yeah. Like, or like, wait a second, how do I know? Like,
Yeah.
has there been any quality control done here? Like, is there a tradition that's kind of like keeping these individuals in check? Or are they just running amok? You know, like you worked through that Matt Johnson paper recently, and he kind of was saying, hey, like, let's not really be inserting metaphysical ideas here unless the client kind of leads with that. Like, follow the client as opposed to be like pushing your metaphysic and your religious ideas on the client in a more clinical scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really interesting paper. Hopefully we can get him on in the future to actually talk about it. But
That would be great.
he brought up some great points, just even about the word consciousness. Like, I think people just
Yeah.
toss that around. We're not really defining it or not really understanding like what consciousness is when we talk about it. And I think that's a really important point. And yeah, from the clinical perspective, I thought he brought up some really great points about like as clinicians and therapists, should we be bringing some of that stuff into the therapy room? This is obviously oriented to psychedelic psychotherapy. So, bringing statues of the Buddha and saying like, this is what your experience should be like, or what it could be like, instead of actually maybe creating a container for somebody to explore that themselves. I think that's important, right? I mean, I've even like when we talk in the class, like I talk about having a framework can be important, but we shouldn't be like imposing frameworks on people, right? They're maps, and if they resonate with you, that can be really important for you to help to develop some sort of understanding with your experience. But yeah, should we be imposing our own beliefs, our own spiritual beliefs about what we think is going on in the psychedelic space within that clinical container? Maybe if you're operating from a religious or spiritual perspective, maybe that's okay if people are going in with that belief system, and they're looking for that. But I don't know, I guess coming in from like maybe a more neutral place within psychotherapy, and maybe helping people to explore that and discover that. How can, we as clinicians, or I'm speaking for myself here, like remove some of that stuff and help the client really maybe define the psychedelic experience through their lens. Because we don't, I mean, even just thinking about breath work, right? Like we're trying to not really impose too much stuff. I mean, we throw out a bunch of these are possibilities. And I think the only framework that we kind of put out there is with Groff's BPMs, but still, I like to even be cautious with that. And even when I do some of my intro talks, I'm like, how much do I actually include of this in there? Do I even include this in an intro talk? Does anybody even need to know this? Like, am I just putting, an experience onto somebody by just saying like, hey, the basic perinatal birth matrices, and, this is what you could go through. And, because then I think people can distort that and think this is what the experience should be like. I have to go through these BPMs to resolve my birth trauma. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's not even part of your story right now. And do you need to do that just because the framework or idea is there?
Right. Like, I'm thinking about how I do this in breath work, and I'm just saying like you could have the experience of, I don't know, like there's so many different things, like what it's like to be a whale, what it's like to be Zeus or Vishnu or Brahma or Ganesh, or Jesus even. Like there's so many things in other people's lifetimes. Like there's too many things that you could experience. And I'm really careful to say like I'm not going to tell you what this means. Like you're going to have to come up with like a metaphysical framework for you, for your experience. Like I'm not going to give you that, because I think that's a really valuable anchor for people to have to like kind of struggle to make meaning a little bit. Like that's where I think there's a lot of value.
Right.
Or like, oh shit, I remember that I was molested or had these like horrible things happen to me. what do I do with that? I'm like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I'm going to help you. I'm going to work with you on it, but I'm not going to tell you what it means. Because like once in a while, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this thing happening in like the late 80s, early to mid 90s around like hypnosis and recovering memories. And it turns out like a lot of the recovered memories were not accurate.
Yeah, they're like false memories.
And I think it led to a lot of like bad convictions in courts and stuff. And like, to me, that's really dangerous. Like I've only had one person had that happen. And that was like really concerning to me. Thankfully, I believe they were with a therapist at the time, so I wasn't too worried. I was like, please make sure you talk to your therapist about this. Is like kind of how I was couching it. But you know, like shit can happen. Like you can recover memories or create memories, and like how do we as facilitators kind of say, hey, you know, maybe sit on that for a couple weeks and like, or a few months before you kind of like blow up your family system.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of weird experiences that, you know, like bringing up like say past things. Did they happen? I have no idea, right? And I always try to sit with that and go, you know, could this be true? Yes. But sometimes I think about like more the theme behind that. Like how is whatever that experience that I just re-experienced like still, I guess, like embedded in my system. And I guess I kind of come back to that idea of like coex themes. Like it could be real, could not be real, but like how is that, you know, that energetic feeling of whatever that is, that charge like affecting me. And it's interesting to hear people like kind of have these experiences and then have a facilitator say, yes, that's what happened to you. How do you know? I don't know, you know, like I've had plenty of these past life experiences and I have no idea if that was actually real. I guess from the Whitehead perspective, yeah, everything is possible and you inherit the entire past. So to some extent, yes, that could be completely real to some degree because you inherit every possibility from the past.
Like the goofy line there is like, how many people have had the past life experience of being Cleopatra?
Yeah.
You know, or some important queen or king, you know, like I've had weird Illuminati experiences where like, okay, like I was certainly murdered by the Catholic Church on account of being one of these, you know, hidden people. Like thus perhaps one of my justifications for having issues with that church in like transpersonal terms, who knows?
Yeah.
But you know, yeah, like what certainty can I bring to the table there? Zero, as far as I can tell. And I think it's really important for the future of this movement to have this critical thinking faculty where we can actually dissect and go, okay, cool. Like you had that experience. Great. It was real for you, for sure. Does that translate to real for everybody else? Probably not. That's kind of why I like this idea of couching these things in terms of a personal Gnostic experience where it's highly valid for you as an individual, doesn't necessarily translate to everybody else.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why like some people really dig Osho and some people are still troubled at what happened at Osho's, you know, place in Oregon. You know, I'm just generally there. Like, you know, brilliant, absolutely guru, absolutely had a lot of value to share, but highly problematic at times. Same thing with like the Kripalu situation where that guru got in trouble for lots of sex stuff. Yeah, it's just an endless problem, right? Like, sure, you had all these revelations, but, you know, at what point do we discount your revelations because of your failings as a human? Or do we? Should we?
I was going to say, do we discount that? I don't. I mean, I guess something that keeps coming to my mind is, I think, thinking of Whitehead and what is it, the fallacy of misplaced concreteness.
Yeah.
Like
that's a great angle. Yeah.
Like these things are all real and possible. All experience is real and possible, but is it concrete in the present moment? And, you know, I think sometimes when we have these experiences, it's like, yeah, possibly drudging things up from the past that could have happened. And it is real. The experience is real, right? When we have a psychedelic experience, that is very real to the nervous system, to the body, to the mind. But is it
like alien abduction experiences, for instance?
Yeah.
Like we don't have the capacity to say if there was like a nuts and bolts aircraft outside your house that took you out.
Right.
Or not. But it's for sure that you had the experience, and the experience is wildly real for you and does require therapy, does require PTSD treatments at times. Like there's a lot there.
Yeah, I think about the entity stuff. And, I think this is where I come back to that. It's like when I had that experience in my early 20s or when I was 19, that experience was very real. And, was it happening in this 3D reality? I don't think so. But wherever that was real and happening at that moment. And it affected my life in so many different ways. And, I can't discredit that and be like, oh, well, that was just, an effect of the substance. Like the experience itself, I mean, that carried a lot of weight. But should I dismiss it, right? And say, well, it was a substance and, neurotransmitters and this and that.
There's this one new age guy I used to follow a lot. I forget his name exactly, but he was all over this kind of like the weird circuit I was involved in. Maybe David Wilcox, maybe somebody else. I forget exactly, but the line was something along the lines of like, what is the truth here? Like, what are we trying to go for? And like maybe the discernment is like, does it help unify or does it help separate?
Mm.
And like, does it make divisions deeper? Like US and China, US and Russia, we don't need deeper divisions right now. Like we need a lot of healing between our countries or shit might not look pretty in a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who's doing that healing? And on the more local level, like, let's talk psychedelic culture. There's leaders out there who are kind of acting like assholes. They're not playing nice in the sandbox with the other kids. And a lot of it comes to like context. Like you don't understand where your context is. Like if you're an academic, you're an academic. If you're a religious leader, you're a religious leader. It's really somewhat difficult to reconcile those two things. Or you're a political activist that, has your own ideology that's not necessarily shared by folks in academia. Or like you and I in the psychedelic media. Like there's people we agree with, there's people we don't agree with. And it's, am I saying platitudes here or, just being aware, I guess, is what I'm preaching. Like, what is your relationship to these other camps? Are you playing nice in the sandbox? Do you want to play nice in the sandbox? Some people want violence. I'm reading this book again on Tim Leary and Nixon, Most Dangerous Man in America. And like, I'm hearing arguments from the Yippies, from the Black Panthers and from Tim himself. And I'm like, shit, like they're pretty aggressive. Like even the Weather Underground, like their argumentation was hard to refute. Thus, why they had so much impact on culture. Like, should Black people have the right to defend themselves? I think yes. Like that was kind of the core of the Black Panther message. And, it got highly politicized to the point where they got getting murdered in Philadelphia with those bombs and like other shit was going on.
Yeah.
Like really aggressive stuff. Like the race war was no joke for a while there. Still alive and kicking.
Yeah.
And then you look at like the critiques of American imperialism that a lot of like the Yippies and the Weather Underground were pushing. And is it much different today than it was then? Like not really.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Right? Like why would empire ever slow down? Like if you follow kind of the Roman Empire and like, what was the Roman Empire doing? What's the US doing? Very similar. And, is China doing it differently? A little bit, but not really. China wants the one China thing. I don't know about global domination from their point of view yet, but perhaps.
It makes me wonder.
They want to have their own country. Go ahead.
Yeah, it makes me wonder too, just on this topic of like spirituality and spiritual development. Like I think one of the narratives that floats around out there is like how a lot of these practices and tools will help save us. And I wonder, is that a possibility, right? If we all did inner work, because like how many, say groups that do that still promote violence, that you're kind of pointing out, right? It happens, right? It's like we could all do yoga and do psychedelics and meditate. But maybe when push comes to shove, there's still somebody that wants some sort of radical change that might include violence because the system it maybe feels too threatening. And, we need to kind of like push against it a little bit here and there. But yeah, I don't know. Like,
so there's
what is
names
the purpose
out there
of
that listeners,
spirituality?
Yeah. What is the purpose? For me, it's like unification, transcendence.
Yeah.
That's how I
think about I'm not like an expert in Shambhala, so if anybody's listening, that's more of an expert. Feel free to correct me here.
Is it Shambhala?
But Shambhala, yeah. But I remember I did this course in my undergrad called The Path of the Warrior. And something that kind of stuck out, it was like, to defend your enlightened city, right? Like for the betterment of whatever this like enlightened civilization was going to be. And, to protect that in any means. And that was a spiritual path, right? I mean, when we look at some of those like ancient Japanese or, I guess some of the Chinese traditions there, like with, samurais and ninjutsu and stuff like that. Like there was a deep spirituality there, but it also didn't like, push away life, and saying, hey, somebody is attacking us. Do we just sit here and meditate, or do we actually take action and like, stand up and be a warrior to try to protect ourselves, right? I mean, somebody's coming after you with guns or whatnot. Like, do you just sit there and try to meditate it away, or do you actually like stand up and be like, no, like this is actually a spiritual path to protect ourselves and to do what we need to do.
The Bhagavad Gita, like one of the core stories there is Krishna essentially coaching Arjuna in this battle. And, when you think Hinduism, you think like nonviolence and no harm. But like the holier thing in this scenario, according to Krishna, was to like do this battle and do what he needed to do to, protect his kingdom and, perpetuate this thing. And there's this path. I just scooped up this book, Tantric Physics by Craig Williams. Really interesting. And the opening quote here is, sometimes piety becomes sin, and sometimes what is ordinarily sin becomes piety. On the strength of Vedic injunctions, such special rules in effect eradicate the clear distinction between piety and sin. Perhaps the Agori tradition where they're like, doing all sorts of things that look sinful in order to become more holy. That's why it's like kind of reversed in an interesting way there. Or like, yeah, like sometimes there is this idea of a just war theory that I think like Augustine or Aquinas pushed. Yeah, like, I don't like war. I don't think it's really cool that my tax dollars go to war. But, in some scenarios, apparently, there is a justification for war. I don't like the idea of that. But that's kind of part of my problem, I guess. Like, do you want Genghis Khan to just come slaughter everybody in your village, or are you going to stand up? If you're getting like, if 10 people that were killed by cruise missiles that that the U.S. sent over, like, aren't you going to be mad at the U.S. and want to do something about it eventually? Like, the fact that that's not really clearly understood over here is kind of crazy to me. Like, of course, this is a complicated topic and really messy.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have this many episodes of the podcast if it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, like, I don't know what we really accomplished here other than like showing that the topic is complex. When somebody comes in with authority, perhaps that would be helpful. But realistically, I think the more important thing is to kind of struggle with these ideas and actually think about them very seriously.
Yeah.
What does it mean that we spent so much time on COVID and didn't spend any time or money on climate change, really, in the US? Like, it's going to kill a lot more people, climate change. Yeah. So, like, how does that relate to everything we've been talking about? It's like decision making. And like, are we sensationalizing the right things?
Right.
Or should we be sensationalizing anything? Like, how bad is Compass really? How bad is MindMed really? Like even though they patented a ton of shit, like, does that really matter? Yeah. Like, how important is that? Like, does it really mean the mind control apparatus that Huxley fantasized about is going to come to fruition? Or is it, was it already there anyway?
Right.
Or can we transcend it through community education, religious independence and everything else,
Yeah. I guess, I don't know. I'm curious when you said you wanted to talk about like spiritual development, like, was there anything that kind of prompted that before?
Well, it was the Qabalist critiquing psychedelic culture in general.
Yeah.
And I just thought his perspective was a little limited. Like, perhaps he hadn't, spent time with Groff, or like, he certainly read McKenna, but, McKenna was on like a fantasy trip, really interesting fantasy trip, not necessarily something related to reality.
Right.
Could be. also couldn't be. Like Time Wave Zero clearly had a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Stoned ape theory might be true. Like I think there's something real there around entities communicating to him through the mushroom or through ayahuasca. But we come into this issue like, is the God behind ayahuasca and the God behind mushrooms different? And what do they say that's different? And the God behind cannabis, what do they say that's different? Who's more superior? Well, they're all superior,
Right.
But really, how do you square, what is the real right answer here? And this is kind of why I'm interested in philosophy still, like Plato's Euthyphro, where he's kind of debating the nature of piety.
Yeah.
Like what the fuck is going on there? Like you can't, like what's holy to Zeus and holy to Athena might be totally different.
Totally different, yeah. It's funny, it's just thinking about mushrooms, ayahuasca, and cannabis. I don't know if this was somebody at Soltara. I always want to say Soteria. Oh my God. It's very, very easy to
Where
mix
you
up.
used to work in Vermont, very different place.
Yeah. But somebody was saying like, oh, why is like cannabis kind of like, not encouraged with ayahuasca, not so being that ayahuasca is jealous, but I don't, somebody was saying that like cannabis is just such a trickster plant that like nobody's really been able to like grapple the spirit of it. And I thought that was really interesting. And, that might just be coming from one person or one shaman, but I was like, well, just thinking about hierarchy, right? It's like, oh, if this is like this weird trickster medicine that nobody can really understand, then where does that fall into play, right? Is that like
Exactly. Like it's a big question. But, there's been many books written about cannabis and spirituality. I think there's one called Cannabis and Spirituality. And like what is it that we're doing? I think it's just, there's so many paths and you kind of just have to pick one, right? And it kind of has to be arbitrary to a degree, but you've got to be, if you want development on a certain path, you've got to kind of buckle down for a little bit and do that path and not just bounce between like, oh, I'm going to do the crystal ascension thing. Then I'm going to do the like traditional Northeast Native American traditions, then some European stuff and like blah, blah, blah. Like, there's some disconjunction there.
Yeah.
But if you go far enough on a single path, perhaps then you can see that unity that's overarching beyond it. If that does exist,
right.
That's kind of like the traditional answer in Western esotericism. Like pick one, and you'll figure it out late in a few years.
Yeah.
That like diversity and unity.
Yeah. And I think that there's something
sometimes talking about this stuff, Kyle, I feel crazy.
Well, these are interesting topics to dive into, and I don't know, just a lot of more questions. I mean, I was just chatting with somebody the other day about like, doing all this inner work throughout the years and, feeling like I'm on a spiritual path. And, I always approach a lot of this stuff through like spiritual and personal development and thinking about like, well, what's my end goal here? Like, what am I trying to like move towards? And then thinking like, have I been able to like integrate any of this stuff? Like when, things feel like they're failing or, it's like, oh, well, I'm not like this, enlightened person, even after like, a decade or so of work. And like, obviously it's a lifetime of work, but, just seeing our human flaw, like we're still human and we're still going to get trapped into, emotions and, we're going to fuck up here and there. But it just kind of got me reflecting where I'm like, what are we doing at times with spiritual and personal development if like we're also not maybe creating that change in our life? And what do I need to do to maybe do that better? Or, is that even a thing? I don't know. I really kind of started like asking myself questions of like, all right, I've been doing this stuff for a while and, I still see little flaws here and there and this and that. And I see my humanness and have I improved? Have I developed spiritually a little bit more? And, just kind of going down that rabbit hole of questioning it, which I don't know, I think is important at times because I think it helps me kind of come back and be like, well, what have I learned over the years and how have I changed? And, just because one big mystical, experience didn't change everything, how some people like really talk about, oh, my life's completely changed. It's like, well, we're also human. We get sucked back into this, the shitstorm of being human and being on Earth. And
maybe it's fundamental to like, all right, so largely people that are practicing Christianity in America, or at least let's say Catholicism, like they are supposed to believe that the bread and wine Eucharist is literally the body and blood of Christ. Almost everybody does not believe that. And, are we doing that in other areas as well? Like, we're supposed to believe XYZ and do XYZ, but are we really doing it? Are we letting like kind of mass culture make our decisions for us instead of like these things that we supposedly believe, like these practices that we really believe we should be doing, but we don't do them because, the next episode of Homeland is supposed to be really good. So I'm going to skip the, specific time I was supposed to do this thing. Like, do we really believe in the things we say and do?
Right. That's big.
Are we authentically investigating those things? Or are we just like doing it and paying lip service to it? Like, you go to church, when you're out of church, are you an atheist or do you really believe in God?
Yeah.
In the way you're supposed to, according to the church, at least, if that's your tradition. So there's a lot here. And I think these are important questions.
Yeah. And I think, the word that you just used, like authenticity, that's actually been a huge thing that's been coming up recently in my life. A lot of conversations I was just having in the past few days around that. And it's like, some of the spiritual work that I've done has like shown me to show up in different ways. And then the embodiment is hard, right? You're saying like, oh, the world's kind of telling you how to act a certain way. And so everything that you feel authentic and you feel that and that you want to embody, maybe you're getting like pushed against by some certain thing. And then, maybe you don't always act on what feels authentic because of the outside world. And how do we maybe embody some of these insights, these, experiences to be a little bit more authentic in our lives. And that can be really challenging because it, puts us sometimes in a vulnerable state of showing up to who we are at times. And that can be really difficult.
There's this gentleman I follow online. He had this post the other day about like the people who say they found their Zen, like by relaxing. It's like a similar phrase to like saying anybody who's using psychedelics is doing shamanism. Which I'm like, that's totally disjunct. Yeah. Like if you're just doing psychedelics, somewhere, doesn't mean you're doing shamanism. Not whatsoever. And shamanism is such a diverse thing.
I was going to say, like, that term is just so general. I mean, you could be practicing shamanism by, not doing any sort of psychedelic or trance work, right? Like I kind of like Martin Prachtel's definition of a shaman, who is just a spiritual lawyer who's always like coming up with contracts between this world and the spirit world. And how are they like operating and kind of walking between those worlds? Could be with psychedelics, could be through dreams, could just be through various divination practices, ritual, ceremony. It's not always I mean, just because you use psychedelics, say, in a shamanic way, doesn't necessarily make it shamanic, right? It's a very loose term, and it's just an anthropological term to say here's a group here's a certain techniques that people have been using, and we'll call that shamanism. But I mean, there's so many different types. North American, Native American shamanism might look completely different than South American shamanism, where they might be using psychoactive plants versus maybe using a drum to do journey work.
So let's talk about ayahuasca shamanism in the Amazon basin for a moment. Like, it could be very different 2 tribes over.
Oh yeah.
Like, geographically, like this one looks different. But there is this like unifying thing where there is like a sort of apprenticeship and like a training where you're taken in and given these tools over time. Not given, you earn them in a lot. You're like given the techniques and you earn the, mastery over time. And there's like a certain level of fluency. It's like spiritual competency, or like how skillful are you with ayahuasca? Are you able to do these magical things that everybody else has been able to do, or maybe you find some new ones? Do you have all of the blessings from those plants that you're working with, those spirits that you're working with? And when you start getting into the Western esoteric tradition, like there's a lot of overlap here.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There's spirit contracts, just like you mentioned. There's all sorts of wild stuff, and it's like Ken Wilber does a lot of work on this like states and stages kind of thing, like stages of development or just mind states of consciousness. Very different deals. Yeah, like the stage is more permanent. The state is like a thing that comes and goes. Like, realistically, we could say, like, are you being less of an asshole today than you were yesterday? Like, is that good enough? Yeah. Like, for most practical purposes, I think yes. But like, it's not very I think there's some issues there philosophically.
I think that was like kind of Dimitri Mujanis's like point of view. He's like, do they make you a little bit more or less of an asshole? It's like,
yeah,
if the answer is no, then you're probably not doing the work.
Right. Absolutely. Like, yeah. Figuring out a metric around that is kind of tricky, but it's
the
it's
asshole
functional,
metric.
though. Like, you can definitely do it. Yeah, totally. It's a 10-point scale on these 4 categories. And, this idea of development lines in the Ken Wilber integral stuff is interesting too. Like, how good of a cook are you? How good is your fitness? How good is your hygiene and social situations? And you could break down these development lines, into really, really small areas too. Like, you get really niched out and you're like, I'm really great at writing PhD theses, but I suck at everything else. Or like, I'm a really great cook, but I don't really have too much development in my other lines. So like, his idea is, it's not necessarily that you have to like max out development lines on everything. You just want to make sure you're not pathological on certain areas, pathologically underdeveloped or out of proportion maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, how do we have a more holistic approach to living? There's just, talking to somebody about that, they're like, perfect, business can do what they need to do for their career, but can't do their laundry, it's like, or can't cook, but you can function at a high level on a career level. But
but it's like, what do you want? Like, some people want to sacrifice everything to meet certain goals. Is that inappropriate or not? Like, I don't want to moralize other people's choices.
Yeah.
Other folks will happily do that for me. Some choices I will certainly moralize, ecological things and genocide and whatnot. Female genital mutilation, those kind of things are not really pretty to me, though quite culturally okay in certain cultures.
Yeah.
So, how do we balance that out? We want to be like Unitarian, peace-loving hippies, but like, can we be? Like, I think the reality on Earth, we're not necessarily there yet. Like, we need a lot more development on our like technology and distribution and whatnot before we can get to that point. And we can get there. Buckminster Fuller kind of like helped a lot with that. Like, human creativity can exponentially grow to match our increasing levels of demand and needs on the planet. It's a design issue. Like, the whole Venus was that the Venus Project? Is that what that was called?
I don't know if that was Buckminster Fuller's idea.
No, it wasn't. It was like that weird kind of like zeitgeist
Peter Joseph
spin-off.
Right? Or no, not Peter. I actually just watched one of his movies the other day.
For those who don't know, it's like an interesting organization. It's kind of like a little culty, but it's really interesting. They just suggest, the guy's name is Jacques Fresco. Venus Project is the name of the organization. And it's like, we can design our way out of all of the problems we've got in place.
There's a lot of zeitgeist was Peter Joseph.
Right. Yeah. Half of that movie was really good. I'm not going to tell you what half. So people want to watch that thing, go for it. But yeah, like, we can design our way out of a lot of problems using science and engineering. And, like, we have plenty of food for everybody. It's a problem of distribution right now.
Yeah.
Like, what would happen instead of like corn and soy and thrashing the rainforest if we were feeding cows hemp that was actually designed to remediate soils and build up, store carbon in the soil and recover a lot of the Midwest's, destroyed topsoil. Like, we're about ready for another Dust Bowl scenario in the country. And, if we did remediation, land remediation on a large scale with different crops, like scrapping corn, wheat, and soy, and did something a little better, like hemp, for instance, like, what would the planet look like? We don't even know yet. Like, we could probably do some math and speculate a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it would be a lot better, like a lot less fossil fuels. Like, hemp actually does heal the soil versus like extractive corn and soy. And you get multiple crops a year. You wouldn't have to be thrashing the Amazon as much as we are currently for cheap McDonald's hamburgers. Yeah. Anyway, it's probably enough. We're probably kind of pretty off the rails, and I think we're at about an hour. We are over an hour. Yeah. Any kind of closing thoughts, Kyle?
I mean, this is just a really fascinating topic and always interesting. And I feel like, yeah, just a lot of nuance here. And, hopefully we continue to dig into it. And if you're listening and have any thoughts, would love to hear from you. You can send us an email at psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. But I also want to just toss out there, just in honor of Oliver Merivale, maybe I pronounced his name right, from one of the founders at Fungi Academy. Just heard recently that he passed in the early morning of December 25th. And the post from Fungi Academy on Instagram said he fell and hit his head on a rock. And so, it's the second death within kind of like the psychedelic community within the past few weeks. We had Sherry Eckhart from IP34 in Oregon helping to streamline psilocybin therapy over there. And, now hearing this tragic news with Oliver from Fungi Academy. So just want to, pay some respect and just say, hey, we're thinking about you, and to the family, many blessings. And just sad news.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So it's not just the virus that can get you, everybody. There's a lot of ways to get hurt. So be careful. We'll try to be careful ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've got a long, interesting project ahead of us, all of us here in this kind of psychedelic community. So yeah, just stay healthy, keep learning, try to get some community to fight the loneliness when and ever how you can. And yeah, let's keep on keeping on this amazing fight that so many fallen soldiers have led the path for us. And so, and some are still alive, but there's been a lot of fallout in this long, scary battle.
Yeah.
So thank you, Kyle. It's been really fun.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
And again, folks, check out our 8-week Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists program at psychedelic-education-center.com, CE approved in the state of California, highly transferable. And email us if you have any questions, or if you want to comment on anything we said here. You can hit us up at psychedelicstoday@gmail.com, or on our Facebook group, facebook.com. Just search for Psychedelics Today group. We're working on other ways you can connect with us outside of Facebook too, so stay tuned on that. All right.
Take care, everybody.
Joe and Kyle signing off. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.